It's been nearly a year now since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan forced tens of thousands of people to flee the country. The lucky ones were airlifted out, but many more were left behind. The United Nations estimates that there are still about 3.5 million people who are internally displaced after decades of war. Their situation every bit as desperate as it was almost a year ago.
This was the scene at Kabul airport a year ago. People massed together, trying to get on any plane that would take them. Thousands got out, many more were left behind, splitting up families and leaving their loved ones in Afghanistan at risk. 3 of Shaima and Abdul's children are in the US now. Their remaining 2 daughters worked in television under the old government. Now Shaima says she fears they may be put in prison, and she misses the ones who made it out.
It's my deep desire to see my children and hug them. We're having a lot of problems here. We will overcome these challenges, but I want to be with my children.
Her son was a commando in the Afghan army. Now he's a refugee in the US, where he's still trying to get his family cleared to come over. Life is really difficult for us here. I've completed documentation for my family 2 or 3 times, but their clearances are still pending. Unfortunately, the government ignores our files. At least he made it all the way to America. Millions of Afghan evacuees are stuck in limbo in neighboring Pakistan, waiting for visas. Many were journalists or had other jobs that made them targets for the Taliban. Unfortunately, we have not yet experienced the speedy transfer of evacuees, which is a breach of the pledges made to Afghans by the United States and European nations. For Shaima and Abdul's family, life in Afghanistan is a waiting game. It's one they have to play carefully, with their lives potentially at stake.
For more on this, I'm joined by DW's Sandra Petersman, who is on the ground in Kabul. Sandra, we've just heard a little about some of the many people who've either fled Afghanistan or are trying to. What's life like for those who have no choice but to stay in the country?
I mean, we have spent quite a few days in Kabul now, and what you see here on the ground is really the collapsing of the economy. There are so many people jobless, queuing in food lines. It's like the middle class is evaporating. We met former ministry officials now queuing in the long lines at food distribution centers of the World Food Programme. And I know Kabul very well. There have always been lots of street children and beggars and widows knocking on car doors, begging for food, also drug users that you could see in the streets, but the numbers have increased so tremendously. It's really like wherever you go at the moment, where you walk, where you drive, you see these desperate people, and half of the population, that is 20 million people here in Afghanistan, are depending on food aid at the moment. They are really severely food insecure.
Now, many Afghans are, of course, suffering under the Taliban regime, but there are also those who are glad that the international forces have left, aren't there?
Definitely, yes. We traveled to the countryside, visited provinces like Wardak and Logar, which saw heavy fighting when US and NATO allies were still present in the country. They experienced almost 2 decades of night raids, of air raids, of drone strikes, of bombardments. And when you speak to these people, they are really happy that the war is over, that there is an increased sense of security for them. They told us we can now carry on our lives and we can now live according to our own traditions, values and religious values, but at the same time they also feel the economic situation. I can remember one of them telling me, you used to call us with bullets and bombs and now you kill us with sanctions.
What's become, Sandra, of the pledges by Western governments to relocate the thousands of Afghans who assisted them?
Well, just before we got here, we got some current figures from the German Ministry of the Interior, and they told us just that over 24,000 Afghans were relocated starting with August 16th last year. And out of these 24,000 Afghans, some 3,500 were local staff with immediate family, and some 1,500 were human rights activists or politicians with immediate family, which were perceived to be at particular risk. But there are also still thousands and thousands for Germany alone waiting here to be evacuated, up to 12,000 people. That's what the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs told us. And there is a lack of communication with most of them. And one of the reasons given by German authorities why this process is so slow is that a lot of these people, according to German authorities, lack proper papers to do security clearances and also proper papers to cross borders, because they have to be evacuated from places like neighboring Pakistan or Iran, where they then can board a flight and get to safety in Germany. And for Afghanistan, this means a huge brain drain. All these people going because they were really some of the brightest and most gifted people that would be really needed here now to tackle this huge crisis, humanitarian crisis that this country finds itself in.
Sandra, thank you so much for your reporting. That was DW's Sandra Petersman in Kabul.